Hey, Pokemon Masters, Toby here, and it just happened. One morning, a boy with extrasensory powers woke up and found he had become a Kadabra. This is Kadabra's Pokedex entry from Pokemon Fire Red version, and is this true? Is this really something that happened, or is this the Pokedex embellishing? We know that in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, we learned that Red and Blue are the people writing the Pokedex entries, but is it based on anything? Is it based on scientific research by other professors like Professor Oak? Surely all of these Pokedex entries can't be real. Just look at Rhyhorn. In Pokemon Yellow, it says that this Pokemon has a single track mind, and when it starts charging, it doesn't stop until it falls asleep. But what happens if it meets a wall or needs to change direction? Surely this can't be true. And Pokedex entries about a Pokemon's origins like this. I mean, Ghastly's origins talk about how it's made of gas, but then Haunter's Pokedex entries talk about how it too used to be a human. What's going on here? Well, the answer, at least for Haunter and Kadabra, may be to do that they share origins, and that this ties in to Pokemon trading. Let's take a look. Okay, Pokemon Masters, yes, so today is all about Pokemon trading, and we're going to be looking at Kadabra and Haunter specifically, but before we do, I just want to show you something. This is from a official Pokemon handbook or guidebook in Japan, I'm not really sure, but it was posted up by Hi-Res Pokemon on Twitter, who I strongly recommend you go and follow, and here we see an image of Bill. Bill is the person who made the Pokemon PC, as well as the Time Machine in Generation 2, and this document reads that according to the author, that Bill was born on November 27th, 1967 in Town. After graduating from a technical college, Bill worked as a computer engineer in a research institute for home appliances, and then from a chance meeting with Professor Oak, he eventually began working at the Pokemon laboratory on Cinnabar Island. During this time, he's built the foundation for his Pokemon transfer technology. And before I continue with the rest here, this is yet further proof, and I've been talking about it in so many videos lately, that Silph Co and the Devon Corporation are linked. Because the Devon Corporation created the link cable, a way of transferring data, information, meteorites through Pokemon dimensions, and here we learn that in the Cinnabar Pokemon lab, Bill created the Pokemon transfer technology, which you transfer Pokemon by way of a physical device called a link cable. Okay, maybe you don't with your wireless and your Wi-Fi and your 5G. This is how we did it back in the day, okay? And all of this is important because the Cinnabar Mansion is owned by Silph Co, because we learn in Silph Co that it was at the Cinnabar Mansion that Porygon was created under the control of Silph Co scientists. Anyway, you can check out my older videos if you want to know more about that. Let's continue. We also learned that at the moment it is believed that Bill is working on being able to trade away every Pokemon in the world. This causes mutations and evolutions when some Pokemon are traded, the cause of which is currently unknown. Is it a defect in Bill's technology, or could it be that he's discovered a new evolutionary path? And yeah, let's talk about trade evolutions, because they're so wild. Do Pokemon not evolve into these forms in the wild, or not commonly at least? Machoke, Graveler, Kadabra, Haunter, all in Generation 1. In Generation 2, a bunch of Pokemon are trade evolutions, but rather than trade them with another Pokemon specifically, they have to be holding an item. The idea being, I believe, that the item is getting infused in their DNA. The document references genetic mutations, so perhaps what we're seeing here is when the Seadra is given the Dragon Scale and traded, the dragon energy of the Dragon Scale infuses with it, creating Kingdra. Similarly, the metal coat for Steelix or Sizzle, giving them the steel typing, the upgrade for Porygon to Porygon 2, which again was developed in the Cinnabar Mansion, Cinnabar Lab, sorry. Whereas other item-based evolution happens as a result of the radiation of, say, the evolutionary stone, changing the form and genetically mutating the Pokemon, here the item is sort of becoming infused with the Pokemon itself when it's traded. That makes sense. But then what about those Generation 1 trades? And heck, in later generations as well, we see Gurdurr and Boldore, we see Phantump and Pumpkaboo. Now interestingly, these Pokemon, you don't need to trade them with each other. You can trade a Phantump with any Pokemon and it'll evolve into a Trevenant. But when we looked at Generation 5, both Carablast and Shelmet have a very specific kind of evolution. When you trade them with one another specifically, they'll evolve into a Selgor and the other one, Excavalier, it'll evolve into Excavalier. And you can see how these Pokemon share one another's traits. It's more clear with Excavalier that the Pokemon have traits of both a Selgor and Carablast. You can see the genetic traits have been swapped during the trading process, a glitch in the machine, or part of the design of what Bill developed all the way back in Generation 1. If that was the case, the question then becomes, was this the thinking during Generation 1, that was how trade evolution worked? Well, no, they maybe didn't have the technology in Pokemon Red and Blue to guarantee that you were always trading specific Pokemon to evolve specific Pokemon. Perhaps back in Generation 1, it would have been too complicated to program the idea of trade evolutions being specific to one another, but when we look at the designs of Graveler and Machoke, and I've talked about this theory several times over the last few months, when they trade with one another, the reptilian head of Machoke appears on Golem's body, and Golem loses 2 arms. Those 2 arms go where? Well, they go to the Machoke line when it becomes a Machamp. This is the swapping of DNA, the trading of genetic material. And if that always was the intention in Generation 1, and it's being referenced in Generation 5 with Carablast and Aselgor, then is it the case for Kadabra and Haunter? These Pokemon certainly seem to have a sort of parallel about them. Perhaps it was just the fact that in Generation 1, these 2 Pokemon were arguably the most powerful non-legendary Pokemon, with Gengar and Alakazam both being the head of a 3 evolution stage line, each being Ghost and Psychic type, which were at the time the most powerful types in the game. But on top of that, their identities are linked with Lavender Town for Ghastly and its evolutionary line, and then Saffron City for Abra and its evolutionary line, belonging of course to the main gym leader, Sabrina. In fact, of course, famously in the animated series, the way that Ash beats Sabrina's Kadabra is by way of Haunter, because ghost Pokemon are strong against psychic Pokemon, or because it made her laugh. However, when we look at Kadabra and we look at its Pokedex entries, we learn that yes, it used to be human, but also that it has strong spiritual powers. Spiritual being something that you would more likely tie to Gengar, a Pokemon that, well, you know, and the whole Ghastly line lives inside the Lavender Town Pokemon Tower. Where, and I'll talk about this in the future, but in Lavender Town in Generation 1, some weird stuff is happening. There's a healing circle halfway up the building. Pokemon ghosts appear, like not just ghost type, but actual ghosts. In the original Japanese, I think there's some translated stuff that got changed in the West to sort of represent and identify spiritual powers happening inside the tower. This stuff is super indicative of the ghost type of Ghastly, of Haunter, but not so much of Kadabra or Alakazam. Their spiritual powers are more psychic powers, powers of the mind. Additionally, that when we look to the Kadabra and Alakazam line and their Pokedex entries, we learned that they can cause headaches by emitting special alpha waves, and they can also make shadows appear on television screens. And that to me reminds me of the television room in Pokemon Generation 4, where if you've got Fire Red or Leaf Green in the bottom cartridge of your DS slot, you can find a Gengar. And after all, Haunter and Gengar are frequently described as shadow Pokemon, shadows appearing. So I think the 2 Pokemon are probably related. And while Gengar doesn't cause headaches, it can cause people to shudder, just its very presence. Sadly, you can see how a lot of these traits, shadow casting, making people feel uncomfortable, being once a human, how these traits can apply to Gengar, but you can't see a lot of how Haunter's traits would apply to Alakazam. The only thing in Alakazam's Pokedex that points to anything is that according to its Pokedex entries, it's only those with a strong psyche can control and train this Pokemon. Is that because Alakazam has some ties to the afterlife? We don't really know. However, it is interesting to note that Alakazam does have a Pokedex entry that says, when it Mega Evolves, its hidden psychic power has become unleashed. A glance at someone gives it knowledge of the course of that person's life, from birth to death. So here in Alakazam's Pokedex entries, we see ties to the afterlife, ties to death. And again, Haunter and Gengar have Pokedex entries talking about how they used to be human in the life beforehand. But there, I'm stuck. How do these Pokemon connect? I'm not ready to give up on the idea though. After all, I've been talking loads on the channel recently about Silph. I talk about the warp panel technology and how it was likely developed from Abra, given that the teleport animation is the same in Generation 1, and also that the Silph building is in Saffron City, where Abra is again a big focus point. And this teleporting may be interdimensional, and Haunter has Pokedex entries talking about how it's slipping through from another dimension, so perhaps there is a tie, a relationship there. Additionally, Alakazam is extremely extremely powerful. In fact, it's the second most powerful psychic type in all of Generation 1, next to Mewtwo, a Pokemon of high interest in studying to the people of Cinnabar Island, the Cinnabar Mansion, and the Cinnabar Lab. And again, we tie back to the Cinnabar Lab with Bill, who is developing this technology. But you know, there's something to note here, and I might have even said it incorrectly earlier in the video. Haunter doesn't have any Pokedex entries about being human, but Gengar does. Gengar has a Pokedex entry saying that it used to be human itself. Haunter doesn't reference this. Ghastly doesn't reference this. Ghastly is instead said to be made of gases in the air. Meanwhile, Kadabra, it says that it used to be a human person. And then Alakazam, no references of this. Perhaps the big trade trait that Kadabra gave to Gengar is the fact that it used to be human. Gengar used to be human only in the sense that its DNA came from a Kadabra, which was transformed from a human. And in Emerald, it specifically says that it's rumored that a boy with extrasensory powers was transformed into Kadabra when taking part in research. And now it all comes together in a little kind of way. Because if we have Silph Co, and they've got the Cinnabar Lab, and they've got the Silph Co building, and they're doing research into Abra and teleportation, perhaps one day a human ends up accidentally transformed into a Kadabra themselves. That Kadabra is then traded as part of Bill's research with a Haunter, and the Gengar that results from it also used to be human. That same boy who was transformed into a Kadabra after taking part in the Silph Co research, because that's what happens to ex-Silph Co employees, and that explains why Silph Co would be interested in developing the Silph Scope, an item that allows them to see ghosts. Meanwhile, by trading Haunter with the Kadabra line, Kadabra would evolve into Alakazam, and the people of Silph Co would be better able to understand Haunter's natural interdimensional powers to help them in assisting with the creation of teleportation and the warp panels. Again, it's all just kind of speculation, but if Graveler and Machoke really do so clearly trade traits when they are swapped, and there's this old document, this handbook, that talks about how when Pokemon are traded, they undergo these genetic mutations, and in Generation 5, it's directly referenced with Aselgor and Shelmet, then why wouldn't Haunter and Kadabra be connected in this way? But that's just a theory. Hope you've all been enjoying. Thank you all for watching. You're all lovely. Thank you to all of my lovely supporters over on Patreon. If you don't know what Patreon is, by the way, I'll do a little shout out for it. I haven't done one in a long time. It is like a monthly subscription service where you can support the channel by donating funds. You absolutely do not have to do it. I never expect it of anyone. It's always appreciated, but never expected. Just watching the videos is enough. And thank you to anyone watching, liking, leaving comments, watching videos after you're done with them on 0.25 times speed. All very much appreciated. But for those of you who do want to help out that way, it just allows me to keep on working on projects. I've got big projects that I'm working on down the line. My new Fakemon region is very nearly done. Again, I've already paid for all of that, but it's going to start airing, I think, at the end of August. And that will be a guaranteed one video a week, in addition to the videos that I'm already doing, which I already feel like are so much better than the videos I was releasing a few months ago. So thank you for the support. Thank you for the love. Oh, and thank you for nearly or just passing 240,000 subscribers. We're nearly at 250,000. Thank you. And of course, so hi Pokemon Masters.
This is Ash Ketchum. You just watched a video by Birdkeeper Toby. That makes you a Pokemon Master.
A huge thank you to those of you who have been supporting this channel financially, whether that's through buying my merch, my Tree of Life poster, or those of you supporting me on Patreon, including the big patrons of this month, JD Gottlich, Michael Hornschuch, and Matty B. Thank you.